Casablanca. Cult movies and intertextual collage. Cult. Was that artillery fire, or is it my heart pounding? Whenever Casablanca is shown, at this point the audience reacts with an enthusiasm, usually reserved for football. Sometimes a single word is enough. Fans cry every time Bogey says, "Kid." Frequently the spectators quote the best lines before the actors say them. According to traditional standards in aesthetics, Casablanca is not a work of art, if such an expression still has a meaning. In any case, if the films of Dreyer, Eisenstein, or Antonioni are works of art, Casablanca represents a very modest aesthetic achievement. It is a hodgepodge of sensational scenes strung together implausibly. Its characters are psychologically incredible. Its actors act in a mannered way. Nevertheless, it is a great example of cinematic discourse, a palimpsest for future students of 20th century religiosity, a paramount laboratory for semiotic research into textual strategies. Moreover, it has become a cult movie. What are the requirements for transforming a book or a movie into a cult object? The work must be loved, obviously, but this is not enough. It must provide a completely furnished world so that its fans can quote characters and episodes as if they were aspects of the fans' private sectarian world, a world about which one can make up quizzes and play trivia games, so that the adepts of the sect recognize through each other a shared expertise. Naturally, all these elements, characters, and episodes must have some archetypical appeal, as we shall see. One can ask and answer questions about the various subway stations of New York or Paris only if these spots have become or have been assumed as mythical areas, and such names as Canarsie-Lines or Vincennes-Neuilly stand not only for physical places, but become the catalyzers of collective memories. Curiously enough, a book can also inspire a cult, even though it is a great work of art. Both The Three Musketeers and The Divine Comedy rank among the cult books, and there are more trivia games among the fans of Dante than among the fans of Dumas. I suspect that a cult movie, on the contrary, must display some organic imperfections. It seems that the boastful Rio Bravo is a cult movie, and The Great Stagecoach is not. I think that in order to transform a work into a cult object, one must be able to break, dislocate, unhinge it, so that one can remember only parts of it, irrespective of their original relationship with the whole. In the case of a book, one can unhinge it, so to speak, physically, reducing it to a series of excerpts. A movie, on the contrary, must be already ramshackle, rickety, unhinged in itself. A perfect movie, since it cannot be reread every time we want, from the point we choose, as happens with a book, remains in our memory as a whole, in the form of a central idea or emotion. Only an unhinged movie survives as a disconnected series of images, of peaks, of visual icebergs. It should display not one central idea, but many. It should not reveal a coherent philosophy of composition. It must live on, and because of, its glorious ricketiness. However, it must have some quality. Let me say that it can be ramshackle from the production point of view, in that nobody knew exactly what was going to be done next, as happened evidently with the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But it must display certain textual features, in the sense that, outside the conscious control of its creators, it becomes a sort of textual syllabus, a living example of living textuality. Its addressee must suspect it is not true that works are created by their authors. Works are created by works, texts are created by texts. Altogether they speak to each other independently of the intention of their authors. A cult movie is the proof that, as literature comes from literature, cinema comes from cinema. Which elements, in a movie, can be separated from the whole and adored for themselves? In order to go on with this analysis of Casablanca, I should use some important semiotic categories, such as the ones, provided by the Russian formalists, of theme and motif. I confess I find it very difficult to ascertain what the various Russian formalists meant by motif. If, as Veselovsky says, a motif is the simplest narrative unit, then one wonders why Fire from Heaven should belong to the same category as The Persecuted Maid, since the former can be represented by an image, while the latter requires a certain narrative development. It would be interesting to follow Tomaszewski and to look in Casablanca for free or tied or for dynamic or static motifs. We should distinguish between more or less universal narrative functions, a la prop, visual stereotypes like the cynic adventurer, and more complex archetypical situations like the unhappy love. I hope someone will do this job, but here I will assume, more prudently, and borrowing the concept from research into artificial intelligence, the more flexible notion of frame. In The Role of the Reader, I distinguish between common and intertextual frames. I meant by common frame data structures for representing stereotyped situations, such as dining at a restaurant or going to the railway station. In other words, a sequence of actions more or less coded by our normal experience. And by intertextual frames, I meant stereotyped situations derived from preceding textual tradition and recorded by our encyclopedia, such as, for example, the standard duel between the sheriff and the bad guy, or the narrative situation in which the hero fights the villain and wins. Or more macroscopic textual situations, such as the story of the Vierge Choulée, Dishonored Virgin, or the classic recognition scene. Bakhtin considered it a motif in the sense of a chronotope. We could distinguish between stereotyped intertextual frames, for instance, the drunkard redeemed by love, and stereotyped iconographical units, for instance, the evil Nazi. But since even these iconographical units, when they appear in a movie, if they do not directly elicit an action, at least suggest its possible development, we can use the notion of intertextual frame to cover both. Moreover, we are interested in finding those frames that not only are recognizable by the audience, as belonging to a sort of ancestral intertextual tradition, but that also display a particular fascination. A suspect who eludes a passport control and is shot by the police is undoubtedly an intertextual frame, but it does not have a magic flavor. Let me address intuitively the idea of magic frame. Let me define as magic those frames that, when they appear in a movie and can be separated from the whole, transform this movie into a cult object. In Casablanca, we find more intertextual frames than magic intertextual frames. I will call the latter intertextual archetypes. The term archetype does not claim to have any particular psychoanalytic or mythic connotation, but serves only to indicate a pre-established and frequently reappearing narrative situation, cited or in some way recycled by innumerable other texts, and provoking in the addressee a sort of intense emotion accompanied by the vague feeling of déjà vu that everybody yearns to see again. I would not say that an intertextual archetype is necessarily universal. It can belong to a rather recent textual tradition, as with certain topoi of slapstick comedy. It is sufficient to consider it as a topos, or standard situation, that manages to be particularly appealing to a given cultural area or historical period. The making of Casablanca. Can I tell you a story? Ilse asks. Then she adds, I don't know the finish yet. Rick says, well, go on, tell it. Maybe one will come to you as you go along. Rick's line is a sort of epitome of Casablanca itself. According to Ingrid Bergman, the film was apparently made up at the same time that it was being shot. Until the last moment, not even Michael Curtiz knew whether Ilse would leave with Rick or with Victor, and Ingrid Bergman seemed so fascinatingly mysterious because she did not know at which man she was to look with greater tenderness. This explains why, in the story, she does not, in fact, choose her fate. She is chosen. When you don't know how to deal with a story, you put stereotyped situations in it because you know that they, at least, have already worked elsewhere. Let us take a marginal but revealing example. Each time Laszlo orders something to drink, and it happens 4 times, he changes his choice. 1. Cointreau, 2. Cocktail, 3. Cognac, and 4. Whiskey. He wants drink champagne, but he does not ask for it. Why such confusing and confused drinking habits for a man endowed with an ascetic temper? There is no psychological reason. My guess is that each time Curtis was simply quoting, unconsciously, similar situations in other movies, and trying to provide a reasonably complete repetition of them. Thus one is tempted to read Casablanca as T.S. Eliot read Hamlet, attributing its fascination not to the fact that it was a successful work. Actually, he considered it one of Shakespeare's less fortunate efforts, but to the imperfection of its composition. He viewed Hamlet as the result of an unsuccessful fusion of several earlier versions of the story, and so the puzzling ambiguity with the main character was due to the author's difficulty in putting together different topoi. So both public and critics find Hamlet beautiful because it is interesting, but believe it is interesting because it is beautiful. On a smaller scale, the same thing happened to Casablanca. Forced to improvise a plot, the authors mixed a little of everything, and everything they chose came from a repertoire that had stood the test of time. When only a few of these formulas are used, the result is simply kitsch. But when the repertoire of stock formulas is used wholesale, then the result is an architecture like Gaudi's Sagrada Familia. The same vertigo, the same stroke of genius. Stop by stop. Every story involves one or more archetypes. To make a good story, a single archetype is usually enough. But Casablanca is not satisfied with that. It uses them all. It would be nice to identify our archetypes scene by scene and shot by shot, stopping the tape at every relevant step. Every time I have scanned Casablanca with very cooperative research groups, the review has taken many hours. Furthermore, when a team starts this kind of game, the instances of stopping the videotape increase proportionally with the size of the audience. Each member of the team sees something that the others have missed, and many of them start to find in the movie even memories of movies made after Casablanca. Evidently the normal situation for a cult movie, suggesting that perhaps the best deconstructive reading should be made of unhinged texts, or that deconstruction is simply a way of breaking up texts. However, I think that the first 20 minutes of the film represent a sort of review of the principal archetypes. Once they have been assembled, without any synthetic concern, then the story starts to suggest a sort of savage syntax of the archetypical elements and organizes them in multi-leveled oppositions. Casablanca looks like a musical piece with an extraordinarily long overture, where every theme is exhibited according to a monodic line. Only later does the symphonic work take place. In a way, the first 20 minutes could be analyzed by a Russian formalist, and the rest by a Grimasian. Let me then try only a simple analysis of the first part. I think that a real text analytical study of Casablanca is still to be made, and I offer only some hints to future teams of researchers who will carry out someday a complete reconstruction of its deep textual structure. 1. First, African music, then the Marseillaise. 2 different genres are evoked, adventure movie and patriotic movie. 2. Third genre, the Globe, newsreel. The voice even suggests the news report. 4th genre, the Odyssey of Refugees. 5th genre, Casablanca and Lisbon are traditionally haute lieux, favorite places, for international intrigues. Thus, in 2 minutes, 5 genres are evoked. 3. Casablanca, Lisbon, passage to the promised land, Lisbon, America. Casablanca is the magic door. We still do not know what the magic key is, or by which magic horse one can reach the promised land. 4. Wait. To make the passage, one must submit to a test. the long expectation. Purgatory situation. 5. Deutschland über alles. The German anthem introduces the theme of barbarians. 6. The Casbah, Pepe le Moco. Confusion, robberies, violence, and repression. 7. Pétain, Vichy versus the Cross of Lorraine. See at the end the same opposition closing the story. Ode de Vichy versus the choice of the resistance. War propaganda movie. 8. The magic key. The visa. It is around the winning of the magic key that passions are unleashed. Captain Renault mentioned. He's the guardian of the door, or the boatman of the Acheron to be conquered by a magic gift, money or sex. 9. The magic horse. The airplane. The airplane flies over Rick's Café Américain, thus recalling the promised land of which the café is the reduced model. 10. Major Strasser shows up. Theme of the barbarians and their emasculated slaves. Je suis l'empire à la fin de la décadence, qui regarde passer les grandes barbares blancs, en composant des acrostiques indolents. 11. Everybody comes to Rick's. By quoting the original play, Renault introduces the audience to the café. The interior, Foreign Legion. Each character has a different nationality and a different story to tell, and also his own skeleton in the closet. Grand Hotel. People come and people go, and nothing ever happens. Mississippi Riverboat. New Orleans Brothel. Black piano player. The Gambling Inferno in Macau or Singapore, with Chinese women. The Smuggler's Paradise. The last outpost on the edge of the desert. Rick's place is a magic circle, where everything can happen. Love, death, pursuit, espionage, games of chance, seductions, music, patriotism. Limited resources, and the unity of place, due to the theatrical origin of the story, suggested an admirable condensation of events in a single setting. One can identify the usual paraphernalia of at least 10 exotic genres. 12. Rick slowly shows up, first by synecdoche, his hand, then by metonymy, the check. The various aspects of the contradictory, plurifilmic personality of Rick are introduced. The fatal adventurer, the self-made businessman, money is money, the tough guy from a gangster movie, our man in Casablanca, international intrigue, the cynic. Only later will he be characterized also as the Hemingwayan hero. He helped the Ethiopians and the Spaniards against fascism. He does not drink. This undoubtedly represents a nice problem, for later Rick must play the role of the redeemed drunkard, and he has to be made a drunkard as a disillusioned lover, so that he can be redeemed. But Bogey's face sustains rather well this unbearable number of contradictory psychological features. 13. The magic key. In person. The transit letters. Rick receives them from Peter Lorre, and from this moment everybody wants them. How to avoid thinking of Sam Spade and of the Maltese Falcon. 14. Music hall. Mr. Ferrari. Change of genre. Comedy with brilliant dialogue. Rick is now the disenchanted lover, or the cynical seducer. 15. Rick versus Renault, the charming scoundrels. 16. The theme of the magic horse and the promised land returns. 17. Roulette as the game of life and death. Russian roulette that devours fortunes and can destroy the happiness of the Bulgarian couple. The epiphany of innocence. The dirty trick, cheating at cards. At this point the trick is an evil one, but later it will be a good one, providing a way to the magic key for the Bulgarian bride. 18. Arrest and tentative escape of Ugarte. Action movie. 19. Laszlo and Ilsa. The uncontaminated hero and La Femme Fatale. Both in white, always. Clever opposition with Germans, usually in black. In the meeting at Laszlo's table, Strasser is in white, in order to reduce the opposition. However, Strasser and Ilsa are Beauty and the Beast. The Norwegian Agent, spy movie. 20. the desperate lover and drink to forget. 21. The faithful servant and his beloved master, Don Quixote and Sancho. 22. Play it, again, Sam. Anticipated quotation of Woody Allen. 23. The long flashback begins. Flashback as a content and flashback as a form. Quotation of the flashback as a topical stylistic device. The power of memory. Last day in Paris. 2 weeks in another town. Brief encounter. French movie of the 1930s. The station as Quai des Brumes. 24. At this point, the review of the archetypes is more or less complete. There is still the moment when Rick plays the diamond in the rough, who allows the Bulgarian bride to win, and two typical situations, the scene of the Marseillaise, and two lovers discovering that love is forever. The gift to the Bulgarian bride, along with the enthusiasm of the waiters, the Marseillaise, and the love scene are three instances of the rhetorical figure of climax, as the quintessence of drama, each climax coming, obviously, with its own anticlimax. Now the story can elaborate upon its elements. The first symphonic elaboration comes with the second scene around the roulette table. We discover for the first time that the magic key, that everybody believed to be only purchasable with money, can in reality be given only as a gift, a reward for purity. The donor will be Rick. He gives, free, the visa to Laszlo. In reality, there is also a third gift, the gift Rick makes of his own desire, sacrificing himself. Note that there is no gift for Elsa, who in some way, even though innocent, has betrayed two men. The receiver of the gift is the uncontaminated Laszlo. By becoming the donor, Rick meets redemption. No one impure can reach the promised land, but Rick and Renaud redeem themselves and can reach the other promised land. Not America, which is paradise, but the resistance, the holy war, which is a glorious purgatory. Laszlo flies directly to paradise because he has already suffered the ordeal of the underground. Rick, moreover, is not the only one who accepts sacrifice. The idea of sacrifice pervades the whole story. Ilsa's sacrifice in Paris, when she abandons the man she loves to return to the wounded hero. The Bulgarian bride's sacrifice when she is prepared to give herself to her husband. Victor's sacrifice when he is prepared to see Ilsa with Rick to guarantee her safety. The second symphonic elaboration is upon the theme of the unhappy love. Unhappy for Rick, who loves Ilsa and cannot have her. Unhappy for Ilsa, who loves Rick and cannot leave him. Unhappy for Victor, who understands that he has not really kept Ilsa. The interplay of unhappy loves produces numerous twists and turns. In the beginning, Rick is unhappy because he does not understand why Ilsa leaves him. Then Victor is unhappy because he does not understand why Ilsa is attracted to Rick. Finally, Ilsa is unhappy because she does not understand why Rick makes her leave with her husband. These unhappy loves are arranged in a triangle. But in the normal adulterous triangle, there is a betrayed husband and a victorious lover, while in this case both men are betrayed and suffer a loss. In this defeat, however, an additional element plays a part, so subtly that it almost escapes the level of consciousness. Quite subliminally, a hint of platonic love is established. Rick admires Victor. Victor is ambiguously attracted by the personality of Rick, and it seems that at a certain point each of the two is playing out the duel of sacrifice to please the other. In any case, as in Rousseau's Confessions, the woman is here an intermediary between the two men. She herself does not bear any positive value, except, obviously, beauty. The whole story is a virile affair, a dance of seduction between male heroes. From now on, the film carries out the definitive construction of its intertwined triangles, to end with the solution of the supreme sacrifice and of the redeemed bad guys. Note that, while the redemption of Rick has long been prepared, the redemption of Renaud is absolutely unjustified, and comes only because he was the final requirement the movie had to meet, in order to be a perfect epos of frames. The archetypes hold a reunion. Casablanca is a cult movie precisely because all the archetypes are there, because each actor repeats a part played on other occasions. and because human beings live not real life, but life as stereotypically portrayed in previous films. Casablanca carries the sense of déjà vu to such a degree that the addressee is ready to see in it what happened after it as well. It is not until To Have and Have Not that Bogey plays the role of the Hemingway hero. But here he appears already loaded with Hemingway-esque connotations, simply because Rick fought in Spain. Peter Lorre trails reminiscences of Fritz Lang. Konrad Vietz's German officer emanates a faint whiff of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. He is not a ruthless technological Nazi. He is a nocturnal and diabolical Caesar. Casablanca became a cult movie because it is not one movie. It is movies. And this is the reason it works, in defiance of any aesthetic theory. For it stages the powers of narrativity in its natural state, before art intervenes to tame it. This is why we accept the way that characters change mood, morality, and psychology from one moment to the next. That conspirators cough to interrupt the conversation when a spy is approaching. That bar girls cry at the sound of the Marseillaise. When all the archetypes burst out shamelessly, we plumb Homeric profundity. 2 cliches make us laugh, but 100 cliches move us because we sense dimly that the cliches are talking among themselves, celebrating a reunion. Just as the extreme of pain meets sensual pleasure, and the extreme of perversion borders on mystical energy, so too the extreme of banality allows us to catch a glimpse of the sublime. Nobody would have been able to achieve such a cosmic result intentionally. Nature has spoken in place of men. This alone is a phenomenon worthy of veneration. The charged cult. The structure of Casablanca helps us to understand what happens in later movies, born in order to become cult objects. What Casablanca does unconsciously, other movies will do with extreme intertextual awareness, assuming also that the addressee is equally aware of their purposes. These are postmodern movies, where the quotation of the topos is recognized as the only way to cope with the burden of our filmic encyclopedic expertise. Think, for instance, of Bananas, with its explicit quotation of the Odessa steps from Eisenstein's Potemkin. In Casablanca, one enjoys quotation, even though one does not recognize it, and those who recognize it feel as if they all belong to the same little clique. In Bananas, those who do not catch the topos cannot enjoy the scene, and those who do simply feel smart. Another, and different case, is the quotation of the topical duel between the black Arab giant with his scimitar and the unprotected hero in Raiders of the Lost Ark. If you remember, the topos suddenly turns into another one, and the unprotected hero becomes in a second the fastest gun in the West. Here, the ingenuous viewer can miss the quotation, though his enjoyment will then be rather slight, and real enjoyment is reserved for the people accustomed to cult movies, who know the whole repertoire of magic archetypes. In a way, Bananas works for cultivated cinephiles, while Raiders works for Casablanca addicts. The third case is that of E.T., when the alien is brought outside in a Halloween disguise and meets the dwarf coming from The Empire Strikes Back. You remember that E.T. starts and runs to cheer him, or it. Here nobody can enjoy the scene if he does not share, at least, the following elements of intertextual competence. 1. He must know where the second character comes from, Spielberg citing Lucas. 2. He must know something about the links between the two directors. And 3. He must know that both monsters have been designed by Rambaldi, and that consequently they are linked by some form of brotherhood. The required expertise is not only intercinematic, it is intermedia, in the sense that the addressee must know not only other movies, but all the mass media gossip about movies. The third example presupposes a Casablanca universe, in which cult has become the normal way of enjoying movies. Thus, in this case, we witness an instance of metacult, or of cult about cult, a cult culture. It would be semiotically uninteresting to look for quotations of archetypes in Raiders or in Indiana Jones. They were conceived within a meta-semiotic culture, and what the semiotician can find in them is exactly what the directors put there. Spielberg and Lucas are semiotically nourished authors, working for a culture of instinctive semioticians. With Casablanca, the situation is different. So Casablanca explains Raiders, but Raiders does not explain Casablanca. At most, it can explain the new ways in which Casablanca will be received in the next years. It will be a sad day when a too smart audience will read Casablanca as conceived by Michael Curtis after having read Calvino and Barthes. But that day will come. Perhaps we have been able to discover here for the last time the truth. Après nous, le déluge.